Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. Now, we have talked about the lack of funding that the SNP has done over the last, several years really, but it has been highlighted over the course of this conference. But we have now a story where David Kennedy, who is the General Secretary of the Scottish Police Federation, says that unless funding is increased and significantly, then the future of Scotland, the future of policing in Scotland indeed, will be devastating. We've already seen that it's massively underfunded, under-resourced, too few policemen, and in some places they're not even investigating crimes. They literally cannot investigate. And so what is going to happen? Well, under the SNP, he says we're not likely to get much more funding, so it's going to be pretty grim. Anyway, we'll take a look at this, see why he is concerned both for policing in general and for his members in particular, because of course this lack of funding leads to much more stress that can lead to physical damage and all sorts of problems. So we'll take a look at the story and see why the SNP need to massively increase funding to the police. Here goes. So, stark warning that future Police Scotland will be bleak and devastating under the SNP. I personally think that Police Scotland needs to be broken up into at least 4 or 5 forces minimum. Just so that each force then can have more focus on what it needs in its own particular area, rather than one great big monolithic force that maybe concentrates too much in the Central Belt or in Aberdeen and doesn't give much policing to the sort of outermost areas or the very sort of centre of the Highlands, wherever there's very few people, but people who would nonetheless be vulnerable should any crime happen. But that's just me. Anyway, a top policing official in Scotland has warned that the future for cops in the country will be bleak and devastating if funding does not increase. And we've been saying all along now for quite some time, this lack of funding leads to a lack of service. But with the shortfall as well, the shortfall in recruitment, for example, it means that you're not bringing anyone in at the bottom. Meanwhile, at the top end, people are still retiring or going off ill, putting even more pressure on the ones that are still there. That makes them more stressed, more likely to go off, and it becomes a vicious circle until eventually the whole force just collapses under the weight of abandonment, for the want of a better word. Anyway, David Kennedy, who's the General Secretary of the Scottish Police Federation, issued a warning during a fringe event at the SNP conference. Cops have been calling out for more cash from the Scottish Government for quite some time now, as the amount of money handed to the force has been frozen, meaning that it is a real terms funding crisis. It has caused Police Scotland to make tough decisions in a bid to utilise scarce resources. And as we know, in the North East, it's basically a free-for-all. It's the Wild West. Because unless it's an absolutely, very major crime, the police aren't even going to respond, let alone investigate. This is including axing plans to take on 200 new recruits in January, as I've mentioned, as it tries to save money in the face of a £19 million projected overspend. The force is also redeploying staff from the Scottish Police College at Tullyallan in Fife to back up frontline officers during the busy Christmas and New Year's period. So these aren't even fully trained policemen. They're putting them out in their front line because they've got no one else. That could be quite dangerous for the police, but also dangerous for the public. But that's a separate video. I'm not going to get into that now. Anyway, proposals have also been put forward to sell up to 30 police buildings to fund this shortfall, which includes stations in some communities. And we did that one with Rutherglen and Hamilton West. They're losing 3 police stations. They've only got 3 police stations, which means they're going to have no police stations. Madness. The Scottish Police Federation have warned that going ahead with these cutbacks could have disastrous consequences for crime in Scotland. We're seeing already that it has. Crime rates are going through the roof because they just lack the resources in order to police what they've got now. And of course, as it happens, as the criminals realise that it's a free-for-all, it's only going to get worse. You're going to have diminishing numbers of policemen, diminishing resources. it's going to be a failed state. It's going to become a crime-ridden state. It will be. I was going to say it's going to be ruled by criminals, but I suspect it already is. The force have also adopted a new crime-fighting strategy in the northeast of Scotland, with the pilot meaning that smaller crimes such as garden theft will not be investigated properly unless there is a suspect or some readily available evidence. Just phone them up and tell them you've got them at the end of your banging bang bang stick. Can't say the word, you know. They don't like it. I probably could say it, but they don't like it. But, you know, just tell them that you've got them at the end of, you know, and the police will come along. Or take a photograph. Best one, take a photograph of them and say, I've shot him. And when they turn up, just say, there's the picture I shot. But anyway, they turned up. That was the line, wasn't it? I'm sorry, we don't have anyone to attend. And then you ring back 20 minutes later and says, yeah, don't worry, I've shot him. And then all of a sudden there's be like 4 cars turn up and you said, I thought you said you shot him. And you said, I thought you said there was no one here to attend. You know, it's that. Anyway, Mr. Kennedy was damning in his assessment of the future of policing in the country if the funding cuts continue, which of course they are, because the SNP haven't got any money. They need all their spare money for nice brochures. He said the state of affairs in Scotland is policing at the moment is pretty bleak. When the Scottish National Party was first elected to the Scottish Government in 2007, we had 280 officers. And after 2 years, that increased to 17,273, so about an extra 400 officers. Said the highest number we ever got to was in 2013, when we got just under 17,500. So that 10 years ago, they had peak officers, 17,500. He said what's happened in the last few years is the funding cuts mean there's been a catastrophic cut in police numbers. And in April, we will have less than 16,000 cops. So to lose 1,500 in those years is not a good state of affairs. So that's fewer cops than when they came to power, the SNP came to power. Meanwhile, a lot more crime. He says, now we're wondering what to do, what do the public not want police to do anymore? Well, I think basically you're going to get an awful lot of vigilantism. People will catch these criminals in the act or whatever, and rather than calling the police, they'll just give them a damn good pasting. And then somebody will end up in hospital, and then the homeowner or something will end up being arrested. But you say, well, I phoned the police and the police wouldn't come. So look, I had to deal with some way. Then he got uppity. You know, or there'll be crowds of people. They'll find the local yobbos or something. There'll be a whole crowd and a village will uprise against these people. There's going to end up lynchings if they're not careful. He says there are fewer cops. He says less, but we know it means fewer cops on the street. And if you ask around, people no longer see police on the streets. When's the last time you saw a bobby on the beat? Doesn't happen, does it? In the northeast, we are trialling cops not attending some calls, which is devastating for the public. It means we will become a reactive force instead of a proactive one. The situation will be like COP26, when all the cops were covering that, and it meant that we were so short that if you called us, we would not come unless it is an emergency, which is just horrendous. But that is the direction of travel. That's actually what the SNP want. We know that because they've been told time and time again it's going to happen if they don't fund, and they don't fund. So it must be a deliberate decision for that to be the direction of travel. They want a failed state. They want devastation. So they can sit there and say, look, vote for us and get a much better world. That is what they did in Germany in the 30s, and it's what they're doing now. Destroy the land, promise utopia. That's what they're doing. Hamza Yousaf boasted at Holyrood that crime was down in Scotland, which is a lie, as he hit back at criticism from the extreme budget pressures the police are under. But Mr. Kennedy pointed out that it is down because people aren't reporting. The actual rate is actually up massively. SNP MSP Audrey Nicholl was also on the panel and blamed fiscal pressures on the likes of COVID, despite the pandemic ending 2 years ago. She also said she did not know why the police had become reactive instead of proactive. Well, it's because your party has cut all funding and has allowed 1,500 police to leave and not be replaced, and is stopping everything you can stop so that you can push for independence. That's why. Again, morons in power. I'm coming up. When you've got criminals sitting in Holyrood making decisions over how the police should do their job, it is no wonder that the police are being whittled down slowly one piece at a time. They're not doing it big. They're not doing big drops because people would notice. They're just letting it evaporate slowly to increase crime, to allow crime to fester, to allow criminality to become the norm, to make it a failed, lawless state. It's deliberate. And then as they do that, they slowly take a stranglehold on the whole of the country. It's their push for independence is to make Scotland an entirely unlivable country. We need to basically, I think, remove the SNP. Treat the SNP as a tourist organisation. Ban them from ever holding office. Ban them from... anyone who even joins them should be arrested as being part of a hate group. And Scotland needs really to lose that... How can we put that? I think certain things that Scotland has, certain devolved powers that Scotland have, need to be looked at and examined. And I certainly think that things like policing should not be politicised. And under the SNP, it's been completely politicised. And that is a dangerous thing. So if you want to retain a Scottish Assembly, fine. But the police must be outside of it. And the Scottish Government cannot have any say on its funding. Because I think that's half the problem. They've deliberately cut this on purpose to create this mess. Anyway, I shall stop there. Thank you very much for watching. It is a frightening future, but it is deliberate choices. This isn't accidental. You have to remember that the SNP are deliberately pushing this. This is their actual direction of travel that they want. Anyway, till next time, stay safe, stay well, don't commit any crime. And if you do, don't worry, you ain't going to get caught. Bye.